So I want to encourage you, if you haven't volunteered at the school, you need to do so. We've been doing that for a long, long time, and whatever help they need, we hope we can provide. And it's been a great relationship. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you being here. So we're going to continue what we started last week. Last week, hopefully made it very clear to you that you're loved by God, right? I don't know any other way to say it and be more clear about that. And several of you have come to me and talked about how you have started your day with your hands open and saying, Abba, I belong to you, and what a difference it's starting to make in your life. And I know when I first started that, I was like, well, what's the big deal? But it's amazing how you go through your day and you're reminded you belong to Him, how comforting that is. So today, and that came from a Brennan Manning book that we talked about last week. It's kind of propelled us into that. And so there was another book that I read on sabbatical, and that's going to influence the next few weeks. And it, of course, was a Dallas Willard book that I had not read. But it's amazing how they came together, and accidentally I read them both. But I'm just going to tell you that up front because I'm going to steal a lot of Dallas Willard stuff. And I'm hoping to reference him when I do that. But if I don't, if online I get in trouble, I'm acknowledging beforehand that some of it's his stuff, okay? And so I just want to make that clear. But we talked about being loved, and no matter what happens, how we're loved. We are loved last week. And so I want to start this morning. What does it look like to live as a person who's loved by God? What does that look like? And this morning we're going to start at a place that's very, very hard for us, right? Especially those of us who were raised in church. Those of us who were raised with religiosity, as it were, in the church. This is something that is very, very difficult for us because I want us to understand that we've been getting the Great Commission all wrong. All right, if you're not familiar with the Great Commission, it is the last words of Jesus before He ascended. And He told His disciples, and it's really our command too, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded you. And lo, I am with you always to the very end of the age. And that's what He said. And we have always taken that as our responsibility as well. The problem is we have misinterpreted what Jesus said. Because it seems like we live with this idea that Jesus said, go and have people say a prayer. But that's not what He said. He said, go and make disciples. And that word disciple can mean several things. It can mean disciple. It can mean follower. It can mean apprentice. I'm going to use follower because I've used it with you for 20 years. All right, but the idea is that we are called to make people followers of Jesus. And somehow we've taken the gospel and we've reduced it to its least common denominator, telling people, say this prayer, and when you die, you can go to heaven. But that's not the call. The call is to make followers. And what does that look like? And so one of the things that's really, really, really hard for us is we would rather follow rules than be in love with Jesus. I'm going to let that soak in for a second. We would rather follow rules than be in love with Jesus. Jesus talked about this in great detail, and so we're going to look at a passage from Him, one that's probably familiar with you in Matthew chapter 11. And we're going to start with verse 25. We'll primarily focus on verses 28 through 30. But it's important to understand when we talk about Jesus that we understand His Jewishness. If we don't understand that, we're missing a whole bunch of who Jesus was. And so in this passage, Jesus is talking to the Jewish people who were listening to Him. And He's, in this passage, compares Himself to the religious leaders and to the teachers of the law. And He does so in great detail. And he brings that incredible contrast between who He is and who they are. So, Matthew chapter 11, verse 25. If you're in the room using the Pew Bible, it's on page 976. Matthew chapter 11, verse 25. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. And He starts off with a opening shot. and says, all these educated guys who were raised to be teachers, they're missing it. But thank you that the kids are getting it. He goes on, yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. All things, verse 27, have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father. No one knows the Father except the Son, and to those whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Verse 28, he says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And so Jesus says in verse 28, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And I want us to start with this reality that the only place, hear this please, the only place to find rest is in Jesus. It's the only place. Now, let me tell you that word in the Greek, the rest, it means to be refreshed. And so what Jesus was saying to the people, he said, listen, come to me, all who are weary and burdened. And what Jesus was saying is, what these guys are doing to you is wearing you out. They've taken the God of law, the law of God, which is the Ten Commandments, and the law, and they've added 613 additional laws to it. And they've made it impossible. And they've put this burden on you. And it's so hard. And you're trying to do the right thing, and you're trying to do what they tell you to do, because what they've told you is if you don't do this, you get kicked out of the synagogue. And if you get kicked out of the synagogue, you lose your standing in society. People won't do business with you. You won't be welcome in their homes. You'll be considered unclean, and you can't be a part of the community anymore. So you better do all these rules. And so people were working so hard to do the right thing, working so hard to be everything that the religious leaders were saying, and the burden was overwhelming. And Jesus says, listen, come to me. Follow me. I'll give you rest. I'll refresh you. See, the problem is, and I think we need to be honest, is that rules are a lot easier because we like rules. Because when I have rules, and there's a list of things that I'm supposed to do, a list of things that I can't do, and as long as I do those things, then I get to still be in charge. I get to be in control. But the problem is that's not what Jesus wanted. He said, you guys are making this so hard. You're following all these rules, and it's just wearing you out. Hear me say this, please. If following Jesus is wearing you out, you're doing it wrong. If following Jesus is wearing you out, you're doing it wrong. If you go through the day and you think, well, I guess I'll be nice to this person because Jesus expects me to. I'll be friendly to my coworkers because that's what Jesus wants. And it's just, oh, this is killing me. Something's not right. And what is happening to us is what happened to the people back then. And we have to admit that we as pastors throughout the last decades, we have made this about following rules. And we wanted people to live the way we wanted them to live so that they would represent the church well and all of that. And when somebody's not living their life right, well, if you love Jesus, you wouldn't do that. And that's really how we've done it. And what we've done is we've put a new kind of burden on people. And we've taken the rest away. Following Jesus should be something that gives us refreshing new life. It shouldn't be a burden. But holy cow, we run back to that all the time. When I was on sabbatical and in the North Carolina mountains, I was hiking at Ridgecrest up what they call Rattlesnake, and it's a trail that goes up to the top of Mountain Peak, and you can kind of just see for a long way. And I'd done it multiple times, but it had been a decade since I did it. And so I was going up this path towards Rattlesnake, towards the peak at Rattlesnake, and I was doing my 72-hour fast in 24 hours, and so I hadn't eaten anything, and I'd been driving, and I was tired, and I'm clearly much older than last time I did it, and I stopped. And so basically what was going on is my lungs couldn't keep up with my cardio. Right? And so I would have to stop every 150 yards or something, and just let my lungs catch up. And so I was going up this hill towards this mountain peak, and I was not getting there. And I was like, man, I don't remember it being this far. And I was like, well, I guess I'm just getting old. So I would take the brake stops, amen, and that stuff. So I was going up this path, and I was like, and then finally there was a flat spot. I was like, okay, maybe I'm getting close when I get there. So I pushed forward, and I got to the top of this place, and there was a sign that said, "The peak of Rattlesnake is back the way you just came." Now, I had a conversation with God, and I said, I love hanging out with you and spending time with you, but come on, this is ridiculous. But fortunately, going back down the hill doesn't affect the lungs near as much as going up the hill. And I started back down because I was going to get to the top of Rattlesnake that day. And so I got down about a quarter way down the mountain, and there was the sign that said Rattlesnake Peak this way. I went right instead of left. I missed the sign. So I went on and I went up to Rattlesnake, and if those of you who've done it, when you get to the very end, the last part is a tough climb, especially when you're an old fogey like me. You get up to the top, but it's worth the view. So I get up there, I'm at the top, I made it. And I finally look out and I see nothing but fog. Now that has nothing to do with my story, other than just I want you to feel sorry for me, because I made it to the top. All right, but here's what I do want you to hear. I worked a lot harder than I had to get where I wanted to go. I went way farther up the mountain than I needed to get to the place where I needed to be. Hear me say this spiritually. When you live following rules, you do the same thing in your relationship with Christ. When you live and your goal is to try and do everything to make God happy, to make him love you, what we talked about last week, you're not going to do that. But here's what you're going to do. Following Jesus is going to become a burden. And it's going to wear you out. Now, again, how do I know what the right thing is to do? Hang in there with me the next few weeks. We're going to clarify all of that. But if your relationship with God is about following rules, you're going to be miserable. Just hear me say that. That's what was going on with the people. Jesus looked at them and said, listen, they're making this way harder than it has to be. They're giving you all of these rules, and they're scaring you to have to follow it. And Jesus was really good about not following their rules on purpose. You notice that? I mean, he healed people on the Sabbath. What was he thinking? That was work. That was against the rules. And for goodness sake, he would go and he would eat in the homes of sinners and make himself unclean in their minds. And if that wasn't bad enough, he went to Syria and he healed a bunch of non-Jewish people. And he fed 4,000 of them with just a little bit of fish and bread. What is he doing? He is openly declaring, your rules stink. They stink. And he was telling the people, quit listening to them, because the rules are tearing you apart. So he goes on and he continues this comparison in the rest of the passage here, comparing himself to these religious teachers. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest. There's that beautiful rest word again, for your souls. And so he uses the word yoke, and that is something that they would put on oxen. And the ox would wear the yoke and would either pull a plow or pull a wagon that was full of something heavy, or if a rock needed to be moved, the oxen would be the ones that would move that. And so Jesus said, the yoke they're putting on you it's wearing you out. Put my yoke on you. And he says, so take my yoke upon you and learn from me. And he's saying, listen to what I'm teaching. Listen to what I'm saying. Listen to the teaching that I have. You've been listening to them all of these years, but listen to me. I've got something different and better to say. Now, the religious leaders obviously hated that, eventually killed him for it, right? But he said, listen, what I have to say is way more important, significant. And then he gets a little personal. For I am gentle and humble in heart. And he describes himself as exactly opposite of who they were. You see, they weren't gentle. They weren't gentle because they forced people to follow these rules by threatening them. If you become disconnected or disassociated with the synagogue, you're going to be out. So you have to do what we tell you to do. And in the process, they put themselves above everyone else, and everyone admired them. And so you go to the humble part. Jesus said, I have a humble heart. They don't have one. They've made this whole thing about themselves. This is about pointing you to the Father. It's not about making me wonderful. It's about you seeing the Father. So I'm gentle. I'm not going to put this heavy burden on you. And I'm pointing you to something much more important, where they're making you look at themselves. So they wore different clothes, religious leaders. Jesus condemned them for having bells on the bottom of their dresses. They weren't dresses, but that's the first word that came to my mind. Blowing trumpets when they passed out money, just celebrating who they were and having people even acknowledge them by a bow when they would come by. Jesus said, no, we're getting this all wrong. Take my yoke. Take my yoke because I am completely different than they are. For I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus says, listen, the yoke they've put on you, man, it's hard. You have all of the law, and then you have the 613 rules you have to follow in addition to that. Let me tell you something. You follow me, there's 2 rules. That's it. In fact, he said it this way. He said, all of the law and the prophets can be summed up in 2 commands. And they were commands that came from the law. And the first was the Shema, Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 6. And the Shema is what Jewish people, that is their life verse. That is what they follow. And he said, this is law number 1. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. He says that's rule number 1. Love God with everything you have. And he said the second law is like unto it, to use his words, love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, if you can do those 2 things, you've got it. That's all there is to it. Love God with everything you have and love people. That's it. When you follow me, that's the yoke. When you follow me, that's what you have to do. When you follow me, that's the rules. Love God with everything you have and love people. It's so simple. But doggone it, it's not easy to do. It is so simple. One of the things about being online is we interact with people all over the country and the world. And this week I got a question from somebody in Ireland. And the question is one that's very relevant to what we're talking about today. This person said, I've decided to follow Jesus, but I keep sinning and I can't stop. Can you help me? And I told this person several things, but I'm going to share with you one of them. And the first thing I told him was, listen, our problem is that we misunderstand sin because we think sin's the problem. And I told him, as I'm going to tell you now, sin is the symptom. It's not the problem. If you think about when you have a cold or a sinus infection or the flu, what is it that bothers you? It's the symptoms. And if the symptoms will go away, you don't care about having the sickness, right? So we go to the store, we buy things to help fix those symptoms. I don't care about what I have, I just want the headache to go away, or I just want the sneezing to stop, or I want the aching to quit. And so we find something to fix the symptoms, and if the symptoms go away, then we're okay. And we need to understand that, well, and if we were to go to the doctor, we'd get medicine to cure the sickness, right? And so what I want you to hear me say, that sin is not the problem. Sin is the symptom. And so what I told this person is when we focus on sin, guess what we're going to do? We're going to sin. When we focus on the symptom instead of the problem, we're never going to fix it. We may fix it for a short time, but it's never going to go away until we fix the sickness. And the sickness is that we're trying to make ourselves good. That's the bottom line. The bottom line is we're working so hard to be what God wants us to be that we've, in the process, and this is what was going on with the Jewish people, I believe, in the process of trying to be so good, they lost God. And I think sometimes as followers of Jesus, we work so hard to do the right stuff. We work so hard to do good things. In the process, we leave Jesus behind. You see, sin's not the sickness. The sickness is the fact that we don't live a life dependent on Jesus. The sickness is that we aren't connected to Christ. The sickness is that we make it about us following rules instead of about being in love with Him. And I'm going to tell you what I've told you so many times. Quit trying to be good. Be in love with Jesus. Quit trying to be good, because you're not going to do it. Oh, you can do it for a while, but eventually it's going to wear you out. Jesus said, I'm not doing this to wear you out. You can have rest. You can have rest. There was a time here, it's been in the last 10 or 12 years, and I don't remember exactly when it was. I just remember how miserable it was. And I was doing a lot of good stuff. I can look back to the sermons I was preaching, and they were pretty good. They aren't all pretty good, but in that season they were. And people were coming to me after the services and say, man, that was awesome, thank you. And with my mouth I was saying, I'm so glad it was helpful. But in my brain I was saying, I'm just glad it's over. I'm just glad it's done. I would lead Bible studies, and people would be impacted, and I would walk away, man, I'm just glad that's over. Oh, I got another one tonight. Oh. And I was going through the journey and doing all the right stuff, and apparently doing it pretty well. But man, I was weighted down. It was miserable. And then finally one day, I woke up and I said, well, this is dumb. What are you doing? So I set up a prayer retreat, and I went away for a couple of days, and I went down to a Roman Catholic camp, and it was very interesting there. They have a prayer walk where they had the 12 stations of the cross. And I was intimidated about this trip because I really felt like God was just going to beat me up. I thought, man, He's just going to let me have it because I really messed things up. I don't know how. And so I went on this prayer walk, and before I got to the first station, I just fell down weeping. And it was like God said, it's about time. And as I began to process everything that was going on, I was also reading a Dallas Willard book, the first one I'd ever read. And in that book, I'd gotten to a part where he said this life-changing phrase for me. If you're having a hard time following Jesus, you need to ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And I read that sentence 40 times. But Dallas, you don't understand how busy I am. I couldn't get past that sentence. Ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. So I finally kept reading, and he said, We're all busy. That doesn't mean you have to hurry. Busy is a scheduling thing. Hurry is an attitude. And he said, when you hurry, when you live a hurried life, you are telling God you don't trust him. I was like, holy cow, that's me. Because somehow I convinced myself I was so important to have to do all this stuff and do it well, that in pursuing God, I left him out of the equation. So today, I just want to tell you, eliminate the hurry. Run to Jesus. In the coming weeks, we're going to talk about what that looks like and how we make that happen. But if you find yourself on a spiritual treadmill and you're not going anywhere, and you're working and you're working and you're working and you're working, but it just seems like it never gets any better and there's never any rest, you're doing it wrong. Doing it wrong. Because I want to tell you, there is no better place on planet Earth than to be in the middle of his rest. That doesn't mean there won't be hard times. It doesn't mean there won't be difficulty. It doesn't mean there won't be heartache and loss and disappointment and all of those things. But even in the midst of those times, you can have rest. And the secret is active, focused pursuit of him. That's why Jesus said, take my yoke upon you. I'll give you rest. I'll refresh you. And so if you find yourself on this journey and you're just worn out because of faith, stop. Quit trying to be good. And chase after the King. Don't chase after rest, because you won't ever find it. Chase after the King, and rest will show up. Let's pray.